If you were a kid who grew up in the post-war era, you probably know instantly the smell of your nan making bread and butter pudding, or bread pudding as it's sometimes called. Bread and butter pudding has existed for hundreds of years in one form or another, sometimes called white pot, other times called poor man's pudding. The idea of bread and butter pudding is synonymous with the British people's idea of thriftiness and never throwing away food that could be used for something else. When you had a few pieces of bread left in the loaf, maybe even a few pieces of stale bread, rather than throw them out and commit the cardinal sin of food waste, your mum or maybe even your nan would turn them into bread and butter pudding. Bread and butter pudding is made by taking bread. With some variations, this bread is usually buttered bread. However, in World War II it would have been applied with margarine or perhaps even soaked, turning it into a pulp-like paste. Then the bread, in whatever form it is combined with currants, raisins and other dried fruits, as well as seasonings and spices such as cinnamon, before being covered by a layer of egg custard and then baked to be turned into the dessert that we know as bread and butter pudding. During World War II, the Ministry of Food actively promoted the eating of bread and butter pudding, putting it on their leaflet for sweets and desserts, as it was seen as a cost-effective way of giving people something to raise morale and enjoyment in terms of a nice dessert, which also played on the idea of make, do and mend, and not throwing food away, and reusing every last little bit of the food. To return to the idea of the white pot, the idea of the white pot was an eggy sort of custard-based dessert that has its roots in Devon during the 17th and 18th century. And this dessert shares a lot of similarity with both rice pudding and bread and butter pudding as we would come to know it. This is due to a similar set of ingredients. However, where the variants changed and where the link between bread and butter pudding and rice pudding comes from is the fact that during a white pot, bread could be substituted for rice. They could be used interchangeably. This is why both rice pudding and bread and butter pudding became staple desserts in British society, and both share a lot of similarities. They are both simple, wholesome, nourishing, warming in the winter desserts that aren't complicated, but do remind you of being a kid. If you were very lucky as a kid, your mum or nan might make you the Queen's pudding. Now, Queen's pudding is a bread and butter pudding. Rather than having an egg custard mixture placed on top of the bread and butter pudding before baking, in the Queen's pudding, you would have a meringue-like mixture placed atop the layered bread of the bread and butter pudding before baking. This would of course be special and only be for special occasions. Like with humble and faithful beans on toast, bread and butter pudding is increasingly seen by young people as old-fashioned, as something that old people might eat, a relic of the war era, and not something that's eaten anymore. Something that was enjoyed by millions of people for hundreds of years, and that saw Britain through some of its darkest days during World War II, is now being seen as uncool and uninstagrammable by kids who have probably never even eaten it, and just think the idea of something made with stale bread is inherently unpleasant. When they haven't tried it, they haven't had any exposure to it, it's an uninformed judgment. Like with many other hallmarks of working class life, bread and butter pudding has had to be gentrified to join the 21st century, and the version of bread and butter pudding that your kids will likely eat now, if they do eat it at all, will be served at fancy one-word named restaurants and sold for £45, and will feature things like vanilla bean paste, dark chocolate, and maybe even cheese. These things are monstrosities that share no resemblance to the working class hearty dessert that was bread and butter pudding. These pale imitations by people who don't know graph, pale imitations by people who don't know what it is to go without, pale imitations by people who have to have comfort and decadence at every turn. In the age of Instagram, the bread and butter pudding doesn't have a home. What is the world coming to? If you grew up eating bread puddings the correct way, our way, please share this video with people who you know who did that as well. And let's try and reclaim bread and butter pudding. Let's try and remind people of what it is and what it isn't, and let's try and give bread and butter pudding, classic bread and butter pudding, its love.